I never thought a quiet drive on a September afternoon would set fire to the rest of my life. I only meant to stop by my son-in-law's house, the one tucked behind the black iron gate on Elmwood Drive in Richmond. My daughter had told me they'd been struggling with the kids' schedules, and I thought I'd bring over a basket of pears from my garden. That was all, a simple visit. But the moment I turned the corner, my heart dropped. There it was, my wife's silver Camry, parked crookedly, half hidden behind my son-in-law's gate. The license plate was unmistakable, 847RM. I had renewed the registration myself last spring, and then before I could even turn off the engine, I heard it, her laugh. My wife's laugh, drifting from the porch where I saw a shadow moving next to him, my son-in-law. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. 38 years of marriage, 38 years of mortgage payments, retirement plans, Sunday roasts, and careful saving. And there she was, on another man's porch. Not just any man, my daughter's husband. My family's foundation shattered in a single glance. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. Stories like mine, raw, confessional, and true, are the reason Senior's Revenge Tales exists. I stayed in the car, half hidden by the elm trees. It was 2:47 p.m. on September 14th, a Wednesday. The afternoon sun cut sharp angles across the lawn. My heart was pounding in my chest as I cracked the window just enough to hear. "You worry too much," my son-in-law's voice drifted across the air. "And you make me laugh too much," my wife whispered back. That whisper burned worse than any scream. I had heard her use those exact words on me back in 1987, the year we bought our first house. She said it when I was nervous about signing the deed. Now she was recycling it on him. I thought of my pension, the house I'd built to retire in. Every receipt I'd saved in neat envelopes in the study. They weren't just numbers to me, they were my life's work. And in that moment, I realized she had already started spending my future in the worst way possible. I sat frozen for 10 minutes, maybe longer. A delivery truck rumbled by, forcing me to shift in my seat so I wouldn't be seen. I reached for my phone out of instinct, but I couldn't bring myself to take a photo yet. Some part of me was still praying I was wrong, that maybe my daughter was inside, that my wife had just stopped by to bring the kids something. But then I saw it, a hand, his hand reaching across to tuck a strand of her hair behind her ear. It wasn't a handshake, it wasn't polite. It was intimate. My vision blurred. I pulled the car into reverse slowly, careful not to crunch the gravel. I drove 3 blocks before I had to pull over at the corner of Maple and 9th, right outside St. Andrew's Church. I turned off the engine and pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. I should have stormed the gate. I should have demanded answers right there. But I didn't, because deep down I knew if I burst in without proof, they would twist it. My wife would cry confusion. My son-in-law would smile with those perfect white teeth and insist I'd misunderstood. My daughter, God bless her, might even take his side. He was, after all, the charming provider, the man who gave her 2 kids and a big house. No, I needed more than anger. I needed evidence. The first tear didn't fall until I started the car again and drove home. My house on Willow Street felt foreign when I pulled into the driveway. The white shutters I painted last spring suddenly looked staged, like a set piece for a life that wasn't mine anymore. I carried the empty pear basket inside and left it on the counter. At 6:15 that evening, my wife walked through the front door. She set down her handbag and kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. The smell of lavender perfume clung to her blouse. She told me she had been with the church ladies, planning the harvest festival. She even pulled a folded flyer from her purse, printed with a date of October 23rd to prove it. But I had heard her laugh at 2:47 p.m. I had seen his hand. I had seen the Camry by the gate. "Dinner?" she asked casually, opening the fridge. I just nodded. My fork scraped against my plate that night, but I didn't swallow a single bite. Later, while she showered, I walked into the laundry room. I checked her blouse pocket out of habit. There it was, a crumpled receipt. Fuel, $42.17, time-stamped 1:03 p.m. at the Exxon station 2 blocks from Elmwood Drive. She hadn't been at church. She had been filling her tank to get to his gate. I slipped the receipt into my study desk drawer, right under my tax folders, and I underlined the date in my ledger book, September 14th. That was the day my marriage died. I didn't sleep that night. At 2 a.m., I sat in my recliner in the study, staring at the receipt. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Each second was a nail sealing a coffin. My wife breathed deeply in our bedroom, as if the world was normal. By sunrise, my path was clear. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was an investigator, and every penny, every receipt, every shadow of their affair would become my weapon. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. Theft of my pension, theft of my daughter's dignity, theft of my family's legacy. And if they thought I'd stay silent, they didn't know me at all. The morning after I found that Exxon receipt, I stared at it in the pale light of dawn. It was just a small slip of paper, ink already smudging at the corners. But to me, it was a ledger entry of betrayal. Numbers had always told me the truth. I built my career as an accountant on balancing books, checking every decimal twice. This receipt didn't lie. My wife had been near my son-in-law's gate the same afternoon she swore she was at church. That Saturday, September 17th, I sat across from her at breakfast. The sun hit the kitchen window, catching the edge of her wedding ring. She buttered her toast and asked me if I'd picked up the dry cleaning. I nodded, though I hadn't. My mouth felt dry. I watched her chew calmly while my stomach churned. Every normal detail of our life, her reading the paper, the clink of her spoon in the mug, felt like a performance staged just for me. I tried to read the Richmond Times-Dispatch, but the words swam. Markets down 3%. City Council debates zoning law. None of it mattered. All I could hear was the sound of her laugh echoing against my son-in-law's porch. By Sunday, the weight of it all pressed on my chest like a stone. At church, the organ's low notes rattled through the pews, but I barely heard the sermon. I sat there with my hands clasped so tight that my knuckles looked bruised. My wife leaned in and whispered, "You seem distracted." Distracted, that was her word. Distracted as though I hadn't just seen her betray me with my daughter's husband. On Monday, September 19th, I drove past Elmwood Drive again. Not to confront, just to torture myself, I suppose. At 1:45 p.m., her Camry was there again, this time parked neatly, almost proudly, in front of the gate. I didn't stop. I kept driving, my hands trembling on the wheel. I counted each breath, 10 seconds in, 10 seconds out, trying not to swerve into the ditch. Back home, I went straight to my study. I opened my desk drawer and laid the Exxon receipt flat against the wood. Then I added a page to my ledger, carefully writing in block letters. Incident 2, September 19th. Car sighting at Elmwood Drive, 1:45 p.m. My handwriting shook, but I forced myself to finish. That ledger became my anchor. Every fact I recorded was a piece of sanity in the storm. But at night, sanity slipped away. On September 21st, I woke at 3:12 a.m. with chest pains. I thought I was having a heart attack. My wife slept soundly, her back turned. I sat on the edge of the bed, pressing my hand to my sternum, whispering to myself, "Breathe, just breathe." I got up and walked the halls of my own home, the one I paid for, the one I dreamed of retiring in. Each creak of the wooden floor felt like a reminder that this house wasn't safe anymore. By the end of September, I barely recognized myself. I lost 6 pounds in 2 weeks. The suits hanging in my closet looked too big. At work, my old colleagues at the accounting firm noticed my trembling hands when I signed off on a pension audit. "Are you all right, John?" they asked. I nodded, forcing a smile. But I knew I wasn't all right. I was unraveling. The worst moment came on October 2nd. We had dinner with my daughter, her kids, and of course my son-in-law. They hosted us at their house. The kids ran around the table, laughing, while my wife and son-in-law exchanged glances they thought I didn't notice. My fork hung in the air as I watched them. The clink of silverware, the children's laughter, the faint hum of the oven timer. Ordinary sounds in an ordinary home. But for me, each one was distorted, like echoes in a nightmare. At one point, my daughter asked my wife, "Did you enjoy helping at church last Wednesday?" My wife smiled too quickly and said, "Oh yes, it was wonderful." My son-in-law coughed into his glass of wine. The lie sat on the table between us, invisible but heavy. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I locked the door, leaned against the sink, and stared at my reflection. My face looked gray, older than my 62 years. I whispered to the mirror, "You're being erased." Back home that night, I couldn't sleep. I went to my study, opened the drawer, and pulled out the Exxon receipt again. I laid it next to a blank page in my ledger. But instead of writing, I just stared at it until dawn. That week, I realized collapse was no longer private. My wife noticed. On October 4th, she said, "You've been quiet lately. Is something wrong at the firm?" I forced a laugh, saying nothing I can't handle. But inside I was crumbling. I avoided friends. I skipped my usual Tuesday chess game at the community hall. The ledger was my only companion. It struck me one evening, October 6th, 8:12 p.m. I remember the clock exactly because I wrote it down. I sat in the living room with the lights off. My wife was in the kitchen, humming as she loaded the dishwasher. I stared at her silhouette in the doorway and realized I was living with a stranger. Worse than a stranger, an enemy who smiled at me every morning. I was collapsing, yes. But collapse has a bottom. And once you hit that bottom, there's only one way left to go. That night, I decided I wouldn't just suffer. I would rise. And to rise, I needed a plan. By the second week of October, my collapse had run its course. I wasn't eating right, I wasn't sleeping right, and I could feel the edges of my sanity fraying. But I've lived 62 years, and if life has taught me anything, it's this. Numbers don't lie, and preparation beats panic every single time. On October 10th, a Monday morning, I sat in my study at the oak desk I bought the year I retired. The Exxon receipt lay in front of me, the ink beginning to fade. Next to it, I opened a new notebook, hard leather cover, lined pages. At the top in block capitals, I wrote, Ledger of Truth. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about documentation. The very first entry read, October 10th, 9:03 a.m. began official ledger. Goal, evidence trail. No speculation, only verifiable facts. That afternoon, I made my first deliberate move. I stopped by the credit union on Broad Street, where we kept our joint account. I asked for printed statements going back 3 months. The teller, a young man named Aaron, handed me a stack and said, Big audit? I smiled and lied. Something like that. Back home, I spread those statements across my desk. That's when I spotted it. September 5th, a $208.42 charge at the Jefferson Hotel downtown. A boutique place, not the kind of spot you pop into for coffee. I remembered my wife had told me she was visiting her sister in Norfolk that week. My heart sank, but I circled the number in red ink and stapled the page into my ledger. The Jefferson charge was proof of more than laughter at a gate. It was a full-scale betrayal. On October 12th, I met with an old colleague, David Henley, a lawyer who had helped me with estate planning years ago. We met at the Ironclad Coffee House on East Main Street, a quiet corner spot where nobody knew us. I ordered black coffee, he ordered green tea. I leaned across the table and said, David, I'm not here for contracts, I need clarity. My wife, she's involved with my son-in-law. David didn't blink. He just asked, Do you have evidence? I slid the Exxon receipt and the credit union statement across the table. He scanned them, then looked at me with that calm, practiced face lawyers use when they already know the answer. Keep going, he said. Clarity is built on paper. No speculation. If you want to hold your ground in a courtroom, you'll need dates, amounts, witnesses, and if possible, a timeline that closes every gap. His words stuck. Dates, amounts, witnesses, timeline. I wrote them in bold on the first page of the ledger. On October 15th, a Saturday, I took another step. I went down to the electronics store on Carey Street and bought a simple digital recorder, one that fit in the palm of my hand. $59.99. I paid in cash. I told the clerk it was for oral history interviews, but in truth, it was for something else entirely. That Sunday, I slipped it into my pocket during service. While my wife greeted people afterward, I caught a fragment of her phone call when she stepped aside by the vestibule. Her voice was low, but the recorder picked it up. 2:00 at your gate, same as last week. I didn't confront her. I simply walked out, shook the pastor's hand, and drove home. That night, I transferred the audio to an old iPhone and labeled it in the ledger. Recording 1, October 16th, 12:14 p.m. Post-service call. Piece by piece, the puzzle was taking shape. On October 18th, I decided to test the waters with the neighbor, Mrs. Larkin, who lived 2 doors down from my son-in-law. I stopped by with a jar of my homemade peach preserves, a gift I knew she'd appreciate. As we sipped tea in her kitchen, I asked casually, Have you noticed much traffic on Elmwood lately? She laughed and said, Only that silver Camry of your wife's. I swear I've seen it parked there 3 times this past month. Funny, isn't it? I kept my face still, but inside I felt both rage and relief. I had a witness. As soon as I got home, I wrote in the ledger, Mrs. Larkin confirms Camry cited at least 3-0. No prompting. Natural comment. By October 20th, I had enough to see the outlines of a case. Receipts, recordings, bank statements, and a neighbor's testimony. I wasn't ready to drop it in court just yet, but the framework was forming. That night, as my wife sat in the living room scrolling on her iPad, I sat across from her, ledger hidden in my study. She looked up and asked, Are you all right? You're writing a lot these days. I smiled faintly. Just keeping track of things. She nodded and went back to her screen. She didn't know that every keystroke of my pen was tightening the noose she'd built for herself. On October 22nd, I had dinner again with David, my lawyer friend. I showed him the growing ledger, now thick with notes and stapled receipts. He flipped through it carefully. "You're building something strong," he said. "If this goes public, they'll have no defense." I asked him, should I confront her now? He shook his head. "Not yet. If you push too early, they'll bury the trail. Let them think they're clever. The law doesn't reward anger, it rewards patience." Patience. That word became my shield. By the end of October, the pain of betrayal hadn't lessened, but I had transformed it. Where once there was only collapse, now there was structure. My ledger sat heavy in the desk drawer, each page a brick in the wall I was building. I knew I couldn't stop the affair, but I could expose it, dismantle it, and reclaim what was mine. And as I locked the study door that night, October 30th, I whispered to myself, "You started this ledger with lies, but you'll end it with justice." By the start of November, my grief had hardened into something sharper. The ledger in my desk was no longer just a diary of pain. It was a blueprint. I'd filled 26 pages with receipts, statements, and notes, and each entry gave me a strange kind of strength. If betrayal was a storm, evidence was my anchor. On November 2nd, a Wednesday, I tested the new digital recorder again. My wife was on the phone in the kitchen, speaking low, but I caught enough. "Yes, your gate, around 2. She paused, then laughed softly. The exact same laugh I'd heard that day in September. When she hung up, I walked into the room as if nothing had happened, asking if she wanted tea. She smiled, said sure, and had no idea her words were already copied into my ledger. 2 days later, I followed her car. Not tailing recklessly. No, I was smarter than that. I left the house 10 minutes after she did, keeping 2 vehicles between us. At 1:57 p.m., her Camry slowed near Elmwood Drive and turned into my son-in-law's gate. I didn't stop. I drove past, circled the block, and parked by the old fire station. From there, I could just see the gate through a line of trees. I waited, the clock on my dashboard ticking louder than usual. At 4:18 p.m., her car pulled out. I noted the time, wrote it later in the ledger. Visit logged, November 4th, 1:57, 4:18 p.m. That evening, when she returned home, she carried grocery bags. She even showed me a receipt, claiming she'd been at the supermarket. I excused myself, took it when she wasn't looking, and checked. The timestamp read 4:36 p.m., conveniently after I'd seen her leave Elmwood Drive. She hadn't been shopping. She'd been careful enough to stop for bread and milk after her visit, but careless enough to hand me the alibi herself. I slipped that receipt into the ledger, stapled next to my own notes. On November 6th, I met David, my lawyer friend, again. We sat in his office this time, surrounded by mahogany shelves and stacks of briefs. I laid the ledger on his desk like it was a holy text. He flipped through the pages, his finger tracing the Jefferson Hotel charge, the Exxon receipt, the recordings I'd transcribed word for word. "This is airtight," he said, "but we'll need corroboration." "Witnesses?" I asked. "Exactly. And if you can get him on record, your son-in-law, it'll be even stronger." That thought stayed with me. My son-in-law was cocky, always overconfident at family dinners, boasting about work, real estate deals, even how he could fix anything in the house better than any contractor. That arrogance would be his undoing. On November 9th, I got my chance. He called me, of all people, asking if I could review some tax documents for his consulting business. We met at a cafe near the courthouse. I carried my leather satchel, ledger inside, recorder tucked into my coat pocket. As we sat across from each other, I clicked it on. He spread out a folder of invoices, talking too fast, numbers flying across the table. Then he leaned back, smirking, and said, "Between us, John, I've been running 2 households lately. Costs a fortune, but it's worth it." 2 households. My chest tightened, but I didn't react. I just nodded and asked about the deductions. The recorder caught every word. When I got home, I labeled it, Recording 3, November 9th, Cafe admission, 2 households. I played it back twice that night, listening to his smug tone. It wasn't just betrayal, it was arrogance carved into audio. By November 12th, my ledger had grown into a weapon, each page cross-referenced with dates, times, receipts, and now recordings. I even created a timeline chart on graph paper, drawing lines from one piece of evidence to the next. A pension accountant's mind turned into a detective's chart. At home, the atmosphere grew icier. My wife and I barely spoke at dinner. On November 14th, she claimed she was attending a charity board meeting. She left the house in her blue blazer at 5:12 p.m. At 8:46, she returned with a stack of papers. But when she showered, I checked the papers. They weren't meeting minutes. They were real estate brochures for riverfront condos. Condos my son-in-law had been talking about buying. I slipped one into the ledger, noting the date and time. Still, I kept silent. Silence was my disguise. She thought I was slipping into quiet old age, too tired to ask questions. But every silence was a page turned in the ledger. By November 18th, the weight of it all reached my daughter. She called me late that night, her voice trembling. "Dad, is Mom acting strange to you? She seems distracted." My throat tightened. I couldn't bring myself to tell her, not yet. Instead, I said, "Sometimes people hide what they can't face." It was the closest I'd come to confession. That same evening, I added a new entry. Collateral damage emerging. Daughter suspects something. Protect her at all costs. The days grew shorter, the Virginia air colder. Thanksgiving loomed, a holiday meant for family unity. But in my house, unity was a mask stretched over fractures. Every meal, every small talk felt staged. I knew what was waiting on Elmwood Drive, and I knew what I was building in my ledger. By the end of November's second week, my plan had shifted from collecting evidence to preparing for exposure. David advised patience, but he also said when the time comes, you'll want the element of surprise. And surprise was exactly what I intended. By the third week of November, my ledger was no longer just paper and ink. It was ammunition. Every receipt, every note, every recording felt like a round chambered, waiting for the moment I'd finally pull the trigger in court. But I knew I wasn't finished. David, my lawyer friend, reminded me, "John, a case is only as strong as its weakest gap. Close every gap." So I began closing them. On November 20th, a Sunday evening, I staged a test. I asked my wife if she wanted to go to dinner at Morton's Steakhouse downtown, a place she usually loved. She hesitated too quickly. "I can't," she said. "I already promised the church committee I'd help with their Thanksgiving raffle planning." Her excuse was smooth, rehearsed, but her eyes flickered away for just a second too long. The next morning, I checked our joint account online. There it was, a $148 charge at a wine bar near the river. Dated November 20th, 7:41 p.m. She hadn't been with the church ladies. She'd been drinking wine, no doubt, with him. I printed the statement and slid it into the ledger, underlining the time in red ink. Gap closed. 2 days later, November 22nd, I called Mrs. Larkin again. This time, I didn't show up with preserves. I asked directly, "Have you seen my wife's car recently?" She lowered her voice as though someone might overhear. "Yes, twice this week already. Monday and Tuesday. She always parks by the gate. John, is everything all right?" I told her softly, "I'm just collecting details, thank you," and I wrote her words in the ledger, quoting them verbatim. Witness testimony logged. Gap closed. Thanksgiving arrived on November 24th. The whole family gathered around my daughter's table. The turkey steamed in the center. The children's laughter echoed through the dining room, and the air smelled of cinnamon and cloves. To anyone else, it was a Norman Rockwell painting. To me, it was theater. I watched them closely. My wife slipping into the kitchen with my son-in-law to check the gravy, both returning with faintly flushed faces. My daughter, busy carving turkey, noticed nothing. My fork hovered above my plate as I memorized the moment. That night I wrote in the ledger, Thanksgiving, 6:12 p.m., both absent from table simultaneously, returned flustered. Another gap closed. On November 26th, I decided it was time to formalize my work. I spent the afternoon in my study creating affidavits, statements of fact I could sign under penalty of perjury. I detailed each incident, the hotel bill, the Exxon receipt, the recording of her 2 o'clock at your gate phone call, the cafe admission from my son-in-law. Each affidavit was dated, notarized at the UPS store on Broad Street for $15 apiece. I stacked them neatly in a folder labeled Evidence, Marital and Civil. By November 28th, I was ready to push further. David suggested hiring a licensed private investigator, just to eliminate any claims of bias. So I met with a man named Charles Whitaker, a retired state trooper with a reputation for discretion. His office smelled of old coffee and leather. I handed him a retainer check for $1,000, taken from my personal savings. "Follow the silver Camry," I told him. "Document everything." 3 days later, December 1st, he returned with photographs. High resolution, time-stamped. My wife's car parked outside Elmwood Drive at 2:07 p.m., her walking up the path to the porch at 2:12 p.m., leaving 3 hours later. He slid the prints across his desk like playing cards. "She's not careful," he said simply. I added the photos to the ledger, stapled in chronological order. Professional corroboration. Gap closed. That same week, my son-in-law slipped again. On December 3rd, during a casual conversation about holiday expenses, he boasted, "I've been footing a few extra bills lately, but it's worth every penny." He thought he was being clever, vague. He didn't know my recorder was in my pocket, capturing every syllable. Later that night, I transcribed the line and stapled it next to the Jefferson Hotel bill. His arrogance was closing the case for me. By December 5th, my ledger had swollen to nearly 60 pages. Receipts, bank slips, affidavits, photographs, transcripts, all neatly organized. I even created an index at the back, cross-referencing dates with pieces of evidence. It was, in essence, a forensic map of betrayal. At home, my wife still played the part of the dutiful spouse. She asked me on December 6th if I'd like to go Christmas shopping with her at Short Pump Mall. I declined, claiming I had paperwork. She left at 5:12 p.m. When she returned at 9:04 p.m., she carried one small shopping bag, but smelled faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. I wrote the times down, taped the shopping receipt to the ledger, and underlined the faint smell in my notes. It wasn't tangible proof, but it was consistent. The next evening, December 7th, I met David again. I handed him the ledger, heavy now in his hands. He flipped through the photos, the statements, the receipts. He looked up at me with a nod. "You've done it. This is more than enough to proceed." "But not yet," I said. "Not until the timing is right." He leaned back, folding his hands. "When you're ready, John, this will not just be a divorce. This will be a reckoning." That word reckoning echoed in my mind all night. By December 9th, I knew the stage was set. All that remained was the reveal. The ledger wasn't just evidence anymore. It was a script. And soon I'd take it from these quiet pages to the public floor of a courtroom, where no laugh, no touch, no receipt could be denied. And when that moment came, I wouldn't tremble. I would watch the masks slip from their faces and know that patience, not rage, had delivered justice. By early December, the ledger had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just a folder in my desk anymore. It was my heartbeat. Every morning, I woke with a single thought: December 12th. That was the court date David and I had circled in red ink, the day Richmond's courthouse would host a reckoning disguised as a routine hearing. But in the days leading up, the tension inside my house grew unbearable. On December 8th, I woke at 5:14 a.m. to the faint glow of my wife's phone screen. She was sitting in bed, scrolling fast, her lips curving into a smile meant for someone else. I feigned sleep, but my ears strained to catch the vibration of an incoming message. When she slipped out of bed and padded toward the kitchen, I heard the low murmur of her voice. Not words, just tones. Warm, soft, reserved for him. I noted the time in the ledger the next morning, December 8th, 5:14 a.m. Phone call from bed, row kitchen. That evening, I checked our joint account again. A $212 charge at a jewelry store downtown. Not my Christmas gift, I knew. The receipt, printed the next day at the credit union, showed December 8th, 6:02 p.m. I stapled it into the ledger. On December 9th, I rehearsed the coming showdown with David in his office. We went through each piece of evidence like generals studying battle plans. "This goes first," he said, pointing at the Jefferson Hotel bill. "This follows," tapping the cafe admission recording. "And this," he lifted the PI photographs, "will be the hammer blow." I asked him, "What about the children?" My voice cracked when I said it. "They'll know the truth, John. Better the truth in court than whispers behind closed doors." That night, dinner at home felt like eating beside an enemy. My wife served roast chicken, humming as if we hadn't been living in silence for weeks. She asked, "Did you mail the Christmas cards?" I answered with a simple yes, though the stack sat untouched in the study. My mind wasn't on cards, it was on evidence. On December 10th, a Saturday, the tension escalated further. We were invited to a neighborhood Christmas party. Normally we'd go together, but she insisted she was too tired. I went alone, mingled politely, drank one glass of wine, and came home around 10 p.m. Her car was gone. She didn't return until 12:47 a.m. She slipped into bed without a word. I wrote it down. December 10th, absence logged, 10 p.m., 12:47 a.m. The ledger grew heavier with every entry. The next morning, December 11th, I stood outside my own front door for a full minute before walking in. The winter air cut sharp against my face, the sky a cold gray. Inside, she was at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, her hair damp from a shower. She looked up and said, "What's wrong with you? You've been so distant lately." For a moment, I nearly laughed. Distant. That was her word. Distant. As though I hadn't spent 3 months documenting her betrayal down to the minute. I wanted to tell her the whole truth right then. But I didn't. Instead, I just poured myself coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug louder than usual, and said, "You'll know soon enough." That day, I reviewed the ledger one last time. 67 pages, indexed, cross-referenced, notarized affidavits stapled in. The Jefferson Hotel bill, the Exxon receipt, the wine bar charge, the jewelry store slip, Mrs. Larkin's witness statement, the PI photographs, the audio transcripts, all aligned in a timeline that stretched from September 5th to December 10th. It wasn't just evidence, it was a story the court couldn't ignore. But as I closed the folder, another thought struck me. My daughter, who had no idea her husband and her mother were entangled in this web. My heart broke imagining her face when she learned. But I knew better her tears now than a lifetime of lies. That night, December 11th, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the heater. I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. My wife's breathing was steady beside me. I thought of the courthouse steps, the oak-paneled walls of the hearing room, the weight of the judge's gavel. I thought of the look that would pass across her face when she realized the ledger was no longer a secret in my desk, but an indictment in open court. By the time dawn broke on December 12th, I was calm. Strangely calm. I shaved carefully, knotted my tie with steady fingers, and slipped the ledger into my leather satchel. My wife asked, "Court day for one of David's clients?" Her voice was casual, dismissive. I nodded. Something like that. She had no idea she was the client in question. As I closed the front door behind me, the winter air filled my lungs like a baptism. For the first time in months, I wasn't collapsing. I wasn't just planning. I was stepping into the moment where the storm would break, and where justice would finally arrive. December 12th, 9 a.m., Richmond Courthouse. The winter wind cut across Broad Street as I stood at the base of the courthouse steps, leather satchel in hand. Inside that satchel was 67 pages of truth. My ledger, my weapon, my salvation. I climbed the stone steps slowly, every footfall echoing like a drumbeat. When I pushed open the heavy oak doors, the smell of polished wood and paper filled my lungs. I'd been in courthouses before, auditing pension disputes, but never like this. This time it was my life on trial, my marriage, my family, my legacy. David, my lawyer friend, was already waiting in the lobby, files neatly stacked under his arm. He greeted me with a firm handshake. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said. My voice was steady. We walked together into courtroom 3B, a high-ceilinged chamber with tall windows that let in slanted beams of winter light. The judge, a stern woman named Honorable Rebecca Klein, presided at the bench. The air hummed with murmurs as people shuffled papers, whispered, adjusted ties. Then the doors opened again. My wife walked in, dressed in her navy blazer, pearls at her neck. My son-in-law followed, smug as ever, his hand brushing her elbow as if they were allies, not co-conspirators. My daughter trailed behind, carrying her children's school bags. She looked confused, worried, unaware of what she was about to hear. My heart clenched for her. The clerk called the case. Harrison v. Harrison, preliminary hearing. We rose. The judge looked over her glasses. "Mr. Harrison, you've requested this session. Please proceed." David stepped forward, his tone crisp. "Your Honor, what we present today is not speculation, but evidence. Evidence of marital misconduct and financial impropriety, documented with receipts, statements, recordings, and witness testimony." My wife shifted in her seat, her eyes narrowing. My son-in-law smirked as though none of this could touch him. David opened the ledger. The first page he displayed was the Jefferson Hotel bill. September 5th, 2022. A charge of $2,842 at the Jefferson Hotel, Richmond. The respondent claimed she was in Norfolk visiting her sister. This receipt proves otherwise. He handed it to the clerk, who passed it up to the judge. The judge's eyes flicked over the numbers. "Duly noted," David continued. "September 14th, Exxon fuel receipt, 421717, timestamped 1:03 p.m., 2 blocks from Elmwood Drive, the residence of the respondent's son-in-law." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My daughter's head snapped toward her husband. He avoided her gaze. David placed the next sheet on the evidence table. A transcript. October 16th, recorded phone call. The respondent. 2 o'clock at your gate, same as last week. The judge raised an eyebrow. My wife's lips parted, but no words came out. Your Honor, David pressed on. We also have corroboration. Mrs. Larkin, neighbor of the son-in-law, has confirmed seeing the respondent's silver Camry parked at his gate on multiple occasions throughout September and October. He handed up the notarized affidavit. The judge read silently for a moment, then looked at my wife. Do you deny this vehicle belongs to you? She swallowed. No, Your Honor. But... David cut in, his voice firm. There's more. He pulled out the photographs Charles Whitaker, the PI, had taken. High resolution, time-stamped, my wife stepping out of her Camry, walking up the path to the gate, entering the house. My daughter gasped audibly this time. Mrs. Harrison, the judge said, her voice sharp, do you dispute these images? My wife's face went pale. She whispered no. David wasn't finished. He pressed play on a small device. My son-in-law's voice filled the courtroom, arrogant and smug. Between us, John, I've been running 2 households lately. Costs a fortune, but it's worth it. The words hung in the air like smoke. My daughter's eyes brimmed with tears. You said you were working late, she whispered, her voice breaking. My son-in-law tried to speak, but the judge slammed her gavel. Order! The courtroom went silent except for the faint hum of the heater. David gathered the last stack of papers. Your Honor, these are affidavits, signed and notarized, detailing every incident between September 5th and December 10th. Charges at the Jefferson Hotel, wine bar expenses, jewelry store purchases, and corroborated witness statements. This ledger is a complete account of the respondent's misconduct and the respondent's collusion with her own son-in-law. The judge leaned back, her face unreadable. She tapped her pen twice against the bench. Finally, she said, This court acknowledges the strength of this evidence. The financial trail is undeniable, and the admissions recorded are clear. This matter will proceed to full hearing, with interim orders regarding assets and custody to follow. My wife buried her face in her hands. My son-in-law clenched his jaw, the smirk gone, replaced with panic. My daughter covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. I stood tall, silent. My heart ached for my daughter, but my resolve was steel. As the session ended, the judge said firmly, Court is adjourned until January 15th. In the meantime, all joint assets are frozen, pending further review. The gavel cracked like thunder. The room buzzed with whispers. My wife looked at me, eyes pleading, but I didn't flinch. My son-in-law muttered under his breath, but the bailiff's stare kept him silent. My daughter walked past me slowly, her hand brushing mine for just a second. Her touch was trembling, confused, but I held her gaze. Outside, the December wind struck my face, but it felt like freedom. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a satisfying thud. For months I had lived in shadows, collapsing under the weight of betrayal. But now the truth wasn't mine alone. It was carved into the record of a courtroom. And as I walked down those stone steps, I whispered to myself, Patience, not rage, wins the war. The courthouse doors may have closed behind us on December 12th, but the fallout followed us home like a storm cloud. Truth has a way of seeping into every corner of life once it's spoken out loud. That evening, my wife sat across from me at the dining room table, her face pale, hands trembling around a glass of water. John, she whispered, you don't understand. I cut her off. I understand perfectly. The judge understood too. The evidence spoke. Her eyes filled with tears. For 38 years, I had seen every version of that woman, happy, angry, exhausted, but I had never seen her undone. She reached across the table, desperate, but I pulled my hand back. You built your second household, I said. Now live with it. The silence between us was unbearable. Even the clock in the hallway seemed louder, its tick a reminder that every second from here on out was different. 2 days later, on December 14th, I met with David again. He explained the interim orders. Joint accounts frozen, pension funds protected, property titles under review. Your assets are safe for now, he assured me. She can't touch them. That was my greatest fear, that my pension, the house, and the retirement I'd built would vanish into their secret life. But with the freeze in place, I finally exhaled. At the same time, my daughter's world was collapsing. On December 15th, she showed up at my door with the children. Their backpacks sagged with clothes. Her eyes were swollen, her voice raw. Dad, I can't stay in that house. Not with him, not after what you showed me. I hugged her, holding her tighter than I had since she was a child. The kids ran into the living room, dropping toys on the carpet, their laughter filling a house that had been silent for too long. My heart broke for her pain, but in that moment, I also felt a flicker of something new. Hope. Meanwhile, my son-in-law tried to spin the story. On December 16th, he called me, his voice sharp. "You've ruined everything. Do you think anyone will believe you didn't manipulate this? You set me up." I let him rant, his words pouring through the phone like acid. Then I said calmly, "The judge believed me. The bank believed me. And soon everyone else will too." I hung up before he could reply. The ledger had already silenced his arrogance. He just hadn't realized it yet. At home, my wife attempted damage control. She tried to cook dinner on December 17th, laying the table with roast beef and mashed potatoes like it was Thanksgiving again. "We can move past this," she said softly. "We can rebuild." I looked at the meal, at her trembling hands, and shook my head. "You already moved past us months ago," I said. "You didn't lose me, you gave me away." She sobbed quietly into her napkin, but I didn't reach for her. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was financial too. Letters from the bank began arriving. December 18th, a notice confirming the freeze on our accounts. December 20th, a letter from the pension fund affirming my sole rights under the protective order. Each envelope I opened was a reinforcement of the boundary I'd built. On December 21st, just days before Christmas, my lawyer filed for divorce on grounds of adultery. The paperwork was clean, the evidence airtight. I signed the documents with steady hands. After 38 years, I was ending the marriage not with rage, but with proof. The next day, my daughter came by again. She brought cookies the kids had decorated, frosting smeared across their faces. We sat by the fireplace, watching the children play. She looked at me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Thank you, Dad, for not letting them bury the truth." Her words carried me through that night. For months I had been collapsing under betrayal. Now I was standing upright, not just for myself, but for her, for the grandchildren, for the family name. On December 23rd, I drove past Elmwood Drive for the first time since the courtroom. The gate stood closed, silent, no silver Camry in sight. It looked like any other suburban street, ordinary and quiet. But to me, it would always be the place where my life cracked open. I didn't stop, I just drove on. The winter sun low on the horizon. The fallout had rearranged my life. Yes. My wife's pleas, my son-in-law's threats, my daughter's heartbreak. They were all pieces of the same shattered glass. But with every day, I felt myself stepping carefully across those shards, building a path toward something sturdier. Christmas was different that year. There was no family dinner with my wife and son-in-law. Instead, it was me, my daughter, and the children in my house on Willow Street. We decorated the tree together, the kids giggling as they tangled lights. For the first time in months, I laughed, really laughed, as I lifted my granddaughter to place the star on top. The storm had broken, the fallout had scorched the earth, but in its place, new roots were beginning to take hold. And I knew justice was only just beginning. Christmas Eve arrived with quiet snowfall in Richmond, soft flakes drifting past the streetlights on Willow Street. For years, my wife and I had hosted family dinners, filled the table with roast turkey, clinking glasses and laughter that echoed long after midnight. This year it was different. There was no navy blazer, no pearl necklace, no facade of devotion across the table. There was only me, my daughter, and my grandchildren. And strangely, that was enough. The children decorated the tree, while my daughter baked cookies in the kitchen. I sat by the fireplace, ledger closed on the side table, watching the glow of the lights flicker against their faces. The sound of tape being pulled from a roll, the smell of sugar cookies, the giggles of children untangling ornaments, ordinary moments, yet extraordinary after months of silence and suspicion. I thought about the house I'd built, every mortgage payment, every retirement deposit. For so long, I had feared it would all slip into someone else's hands, my wife's, my son-in-law's, their secret household. But the court orders ensured otherwise. The house, the pension, the future, all secured. On Christmas morning, my granddaughter climbed onto my lap, holding a star-shaped ornament she'd made from cardboard and glitter. "This one's for you, Grandpa," she said proudly. I held it in my hand, rough and simple, but worth more than any diamond necklace or hotel receipt. That ornament felt like justice, too. Small, handmade, yet undeniable proof of love where it was real. That afternoon, I sat in my study, staring at the ledger one last time. I didn't need to add another entry. It was complete. 67 pages of betrayal and proof. A story told in numbers, times, and documents. But as I closed it, I realized something. The ledger wasn't my life. It was a record of how close I came to losing it. What mattered now were the people still here. My daughter resilient despite her heartbreak. My grandchildren laughing as if nothing in the world had shifted. Even I, a man who once thought he'd collapse under the weight of betrayal, was still standing, stronger, maybe, sharper. I thought about the aphorisms I used to repeat to young accountants starting out. Numbers don't lie. Receipts are your pension. Simple truths. But betrayal had taught me something deeper. Betrayal doesn't just take your trust. It tries to steal your story, to rewrite who you are. My wife thought she could bury the truth under church flyers and late-night phone calls. My son-in-law thought arrogance would mask duplicity. They were wrong, because justice is nothing more than patience tied to proof. And patience was my lifelong habit. As I leaned back in the chair, the fire crackling, I whispered aloud, "You didn't lose me, you gave me away." Those words weren't just for her, they were for me. A final line closing the book on nearly 4 decades of a life I thought was unbreakable. The next day, December 26th, I walked down to St. Andrew's Church, the same place I'd once parked after seeing her at the gate. The bells rang in the cold air. I stepped inside and sat in the last pew, not for confession, but for reflection. I stared at the stained glass window, the blue light spilling across the floor, and thought about survival, about truth, about the strange path from collapse to clarity. It struck me that revenge hadn't destroyed me. It had rebuilt me, slowly, painfully, methodically, but it had rebuilt me. The ledger was my weapon, yes, but it was also my guide back to myself. When I walked back out into the winter air, I saw my daughter waiting by the car with the children. She smiled, tired but genuine, and I realized I wasn't alone. I never had been. That night, I lit the fireplace again and placed my granddaughter's glittering ornament at the top of the tree. Its cardboard edges shimmered in the firelight, brighter than anything else on those branches. Proof that not all things break when tested. Some endure. Justice had been served. Assets protected. Betrayal exposed. But more importantly, dignity restored. As I sat there, the tree glowing, children laughing in the next room, I understood my story wasn't about what I lost. It was about what I refused to let them take. And in that quiet moment, I promised myself one final truth. Patience may feel like suffering, but in the end, it becomes strength. The new year came quietly. January 1st, 2023. I sat alone at my dining room table, a black coffee steaming in front of me, the sound of church bells carrying faintly across Richmond. It was the first time in nearly 4 decades that I hadn't woken up next to my wife on New Year's Day. Yet strangely, the silence wasn't painful anymore. It was clean. The divorce order arrived by courier on January 3rd, a thick envelope embossed with the seal of the court. I slid it open with the same precision I once used to balance accounts. Inside, the official decree: marriage dissolved, assets awarded, pension safeguarded, Willow Street property solely mine. I ran my hand across the raised stamp, feeling the weight of authority. 38 years reduced to ink and paper. But this paper carried justice, not betrayal. That evening, my wife called again. I let it ring. She left another voicemail, her voice shaking. "John, please, don't let it end this way. We can talk. We can fix it." I didn't return the call. Some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be filed away, like old receipts in a closed ledger. My son-in-law tried too. On January 6th, he sent a text. "We can work this out, man to man. Don't drag this further." I didn't reply. He had already dragged it further than any man should. My daughter had filed for separation, moved back into her childhood home with the children. She began therapy sessions, her strength slowly re-emerging, like grass pushing through cracked pavement. Life settled into a new rhythm. I spent mornings walking along the James River, the cold air clearing my lungs, the water steady against the banks. Afternoons I read in the study, the ledger closed and shelved but never forgotten. Evenings I cooked simple meals, grilled fish, roasted vegetables, eaten in the company of my daughter and grandchildren more often than not. One afternoon in late January, I opened the drawer of my desk and found the Camry keys she had left behind, tossed there in a rush after the court hearing. I held them in my hand, their metal cool against my palm. That car, once the silent witness to so many lies, was now abandoned. I slipped the keys into an envelope and tucked them away in the back of the drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder, proof of the day I stopped being blind. By February, letters began arriving from old friends, some offering sympathy, others shock. "We can't believe it, John," they wrote. 38 years, I replied with short notes. Life changes, but truth endures. I didn't need their pity. I had found something stronger. On March 5th, a Sunday, I stood outside a used car lot on Midlothian Turnpike, and there it was, the silver Camry parked among sedans with bright yellow stickers. A sign on the windshield read, "One owner, low miles." I laughed out loud, startling the salesman. One owner, I thought? If only they knew. I didn't buy it, of course. I walked away, shaking my head, the irony warming me against the chill of the day. Some symbols are better left to rust. The aftermath of betrayal isn't a storm. It's the slow rebuilding, the quiet stacking of bricks after the floodwaters retreat. My house on Willow Street is quieter now, yes, but it is also mine. Every board, every nail, every dollar that built it belongs where it always should have, under my name, under my care. I learned something in those months after the gavel struck. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about preservation, about drawing a line in ink and saying, this far, no further. And so I moved forward, not bitter, not broken, but free. Spring came to Richmond with dogwoods blooming along the sidewalks and sunlight pouring through the windows of my Willow Street home. Life had settled into something steady, almost peaceful. My daughter was rebuilding, the children were laughing again, and I had learned to enjoy the quiet. But betrayal has a strange way of leaving little echoes, reminders that surface when you least expect them. One Saturday in April, I drove past Midlothian Turnpike again. The used car lot was busy, banners flapping in the breeze. And there it was, my wife's old silver Camry, polished, waxed, parked right near the front row. A new sticker gleamed across the windshield. Spring sale, one owner. I pulled into the lot, curiosity pulling me more than anything. The salesman came over, all smiles. Beautiful car, isn't it? Clean history, just one owner. I almost laughed. One owner? That car had been parked at Elmwood Drive more times than I cared to count. It was the silent witness to every whispered phone call, every false alibi, every entry in my ledger. One owner, maybe? But 2 lives lived in its shadow. I asked him the price. We're asking $14, $100, he said proudly. I nodded, running my hand over the cool metal of the driver's door. My reflection stared back at me in the paint. For a brief moment, I considered buying it outright, just to strip away its false history. But then I shook my head. Some ghosts aren't worth bringing home. Not for me, I said, and walked away. Driving back down Broad Street, I realized that was the final irony. That car, once the symbol of everything I'd lost, was now being sold as something spotless, desirable, untouched. Just like my wife and son-in-law had tried to present their affair, polished, hidden, wrapped in a lie. And just like the car lot sticker, their story had never matched the truth. But unlike that Camry, their lies hadn't survived inspection. Receipts, recordings, affidavits. They had all stripped away the polish until only rust remained. When I got home, I found my daughter on the porch, the children playing in the yard. She looked up at me, sunlight catching the lines of resilience now carved into her face. Rough day? She asked gently. Not rough, I said, just ironic. That evening, as I sat by the fireplace, I thought about the journey. From the first moment I saw the Camry at the gate, to the sleepless nights with receipts in my hand, to the thunder of the gavel in courtroom 4A. Every page of the ledger had carried me here. To freedom, to dignity, to truth. I didn't need to buy the Camry, I didn't need to erase it. Life had already done that for me. The ledger remained on the shelf, untouched now, but not forgotten. It wasn't a record of pain anymore. It was a reminder that patience and proof can turn betrayal into justice. That no matter how carefully lies are hidden, truth has a way of finding daylight. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, raised it to the quiet house, and whispered one last line into the empty room. You didn't lose me, you gave me away. And I gave myself back to me. The fire crackled. Outside the dogwoods swayed, and for the first time in a long time I felt complete.